If you can't do it in Byhalia, Mississippi, you can't do it anywhere. Byhalia, Mississippi, population 1,339 is going to stop Kristi Noem. In a follow-up to the excellent reporting Rachel delivered here Monday night about the protests against the ICE detention camps that Homeland Security Kristi Noem is trying to acquire and establish around the country by buying warehouses to literally warehouse people, we can now report that the entire state of Mississippi appears to be off limits to Kristi Noem. Rachel reported on locations around the country, especially Republican-controlled areas, which overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump, that are rising up in local protests by Trump voters to block Kristi Noem's attempt to warehouse thousands of people in their communities. Kristi Noem must have thought it was going to be easy in Byhalia, Mississippi. Buy a warehouse and fill it up with people dragged out of their cars in Minneapolis and elsewhere. Fill it up with fathers carrying their babies into one of Kristi Noem's warehouse detention centers. Kristi Noem is from out of town in Washington, D.C., and appears to be a slow learner there. She might not yet fully understand the power of the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, no matter who that chairman is or which party controls that committee. She is discovering that now because the tiny town of Byhalia, Mississippi, that has a Domino's Pizza, a Subway sandwich shop, Jimbo's Brickhouse barbecue joint, and, of course, El Nuevo Potrero Mexican restaurant, also has the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee representing them in the United States Senate. On Tuesday, the Armed Services Committee Chairman Roger Wicker told Kristi Noem in semi-polite Washington terms to get the hell out of Byhalia, Mississippi, and stay out of the state. In a one-page letter, Chairman Wicker said, "It has come to my attention that U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement is in the final stages of acquiring a warehouse facility in Byhalia, Mississippi, and intends to convert it into an ICE detention center. While I support the enforcement of immigration law, I write to express my opposition to this acquisition and the proposed detention center." That opening paragraph is going to be the template for every Republican senator whose state Kristi Noem might be planning to use to warehouse people. When the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee catches you in the final stages of doing something that he does not want you to do, you better not complete those stages. You better stop doing it right now. The chairman's letter did not say a word about the inhumanity of the idea, but was accurate in its assessment of what one of Kristi Noem's warehouses would do to any community. Senator Wicker said, "Converting this industrial asset into an ICE detention center forecloses economic growth opportunities and replaces them with a use that does not generate comparable economic returns or community benefits. Detention facilities impose substantial and specialized infrastructure demands, including transportation access, water, sewerage, and energy costs, staffing, medical care, and emergency services. From my understanding, the ICE detention facility would have a capacity exceeding 8,500 beds. That is more than 6 times the total population of Byhalia, Mississippi." Senator Wicker continued, "Existing medical and human services infrastructure in Byhalia is insufficient to support such a large detainee population. Establishing a detention center at this site would place significant strain on local resources. Additionally, many of my constituents have voiced concerns regarding the public safety, medical capacity, and economic impacts this center would impose on their communities. And they are Trump voters." Donald Trump won 60% of the vote in Mississippi. Trump voters don't want Donald Trump and Kristi Noem's ICE detention centers in their towns. And Roger Wicker doesn't want one in his state. His last line is, "Keep me informed of this acquisition and any future ICE contracting proposals affecting the state of Mississippi. Thank you for your attention to this matter." It's time to move on, Kristi Noem. You're not going to get a detention center in Roger Wicker's Mississippi. Not because of some moral outrage on the part of Senator Wicker or his Trump voting constituents, but because, in addition to it being a moral outrage, it would also have a disastrous impact on their communities and on their property values. Every homeowner in Byhalia, Mississippi would watch the value of their homes collapse if Kristi Noem got her way and invaded their town. Donald Trump's other cabinet secretary from the Dakotas, billionaire Doug Burgum, the Secretary of the Interior, is trying to rewrite history in Mississippi. He has had the National Park Service remove the visitor brochures from the Medgar and Murray Evers Home National Monument. The home where Medgar Evers was assassinated in his driveway is a national monument. And Mississippi Today reports that Donald Trump and Doug Burgum don't want any reference to racism in any of the material associated with this national monument. This is a result of Donald Trump's executive order titled Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which should have been titled Turning American History into a Trump Lie. Doug Burgum has issued an order saying he doesn't want any material in the department's jurisdiction to, quote, inappropriately disparage Americans, past or living. That apparently includes assassins and members of the Ku Klux Klan. Mississippi Today reports the National Park Service has removed visitor brochures from the Medgar and Murray Evers Home National Monument. Among the anticipated changes, no longer calling his murderer a racist. Edits to the brochure have removed that reference to Byron de la Beckwith, according to Park Service officials who asked not to be named for fear of retribution. Other edits include eliminating the reference to Medgar Evers lying in a pool of blood after being shot. Rena Evers Everett, executive director of the Medgar and Murray Evers Institute and daughter of the couple, said the family has been told the matter is under review, but the final product has not been put up yet. And tonight, Mississippi Today has an update. Hours after Mississippi Today reported Thursday that the National Park Service had removed brochures to the Medgar and Murray Evers Home National Monument that identified his murderer as a racist, the Park Service returned the brochures to the home. For now. Let's see if Senator Roger Wicker wants to stop Donald Trump and Doug Burgum from rewriting the history of the Medgar Evers assassination. Another new poll out today shows Donald Trump at another record low. The Marist poll shows Donald Trump polling the lowest he has polled since he inspired the January 6th attack on the Capitol and then was indicted for using that attack as part of his criminal conspiracy to overthrow the presidential election in 2020. Donald Trump is at a new low in polling because he has no idea what most people want a president to do, and he has no idea what most people want a president to say. That is why only Donald Trump could speak at a national prayer breakfast, as he did today, and brag about how many times he was indicted.
I'd say, honey, I just got indicted again. Don't worry about it, Brian. But think of it many times. And then they say, Donald Trump is using the Justice Department to get even. And I don't. But wouldn't I have a right to? Think of it. There's never been in history a president treated like I got treated. But they say I use it. And it's amazing. I did that interview yesterday, and they said that. They said the question, are you using the Justice Department for your own personal gain? They said, they indicted me 87 times. It's the most incredible thing. But we don't do that, Pam, do we? Huh? We do what's right. We do what's right. And Pam does it.
Donald Trump brought his Secretary of Defense to the prayer breakfast, the only Secretary of Defense in history who has been married 3 times. Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth believe that marriage is one man married to one woman, then another woman, then another woman. And they were speaking to an audience filled with people who believe marriage should be between one man and one woman, and that gay people should not be allowed to be parents, that gay people who, as parents, try to indoctrinate children and are a danger to other children in their children's schools. That room was filled with that kind of person. And it also included liberal-minded religious people in that room who don't think any of those things. But the real hardcore Christian nationalists in that room could be why Donald Trump didn't bring his Treasury Secretary to the National Prayer Breakfast, because Donald Trump's Treasury Secretary lives a life that some of the strongest Trump supporters at the National Prayer Breakfast believe is an abomination and a danger to this society. Scott Bessent lives a life that was illegal in his state until Democrats made it legal. Scott Bessent can thank the election of Bill Clinton to the presidency and the election of Barack Obama to the presidency for his right to live as a married man with his husband and children in his home state of South Carolina, where he grew up. It was illegal for Scott Bessent to be married to a man in South Carolina. When he got married in 2011, when he was living in New York and enjoying the rights granted to him by a government of the state of New York controlled by Democrats. South Carolina first banned marriage equality by law in 1996, saying marriage could only be granted to one man and one woman. But South Carolina wasn't satisfied with just having the legislature write it into their law books. 9 years later, South Carolina amended the state constitution to ban same-sex marriage. And to amend the state constitution required a 2/3 vote of the people of South Carolina. 77.9% of the people of South Carolina voted to ban same-sex marriage, voted to ban Scott Bessent's marriage in their state. Scott Bessent's current neighbors in South Carolina overwhelmingly voted to ban his marriage in South Carolina. And the only reason he is allowed to live with his husband and children in South Carolina is that the 4 justices appointed to the Supreme Court by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama said that he could. And they were joined by one justice, Anthony Kennedy, appointed by a Republican president, who became the 5th vote in favor of same-sex marriage on the Supreme Court. And that's how Scott Bessent was allowed to return to his home state of South Carolina as a married gay man and father. And that 5th vote for marriage equality is no longer on the Supreme Court. Now there are 6 votes on the Supreme Court against the decision that made Scott Bessent's marriage legal in all 50 states. And it might only be a matter of time now before the right case presents itself to the Trump Supreme Court for them to declare that Scott Bessent's marriage is once again illegal in the state of South Carolina and any other state that wants to make it illegal. And Scott Bessent will have to hurry back to New York or to California or to Massachusetts, where he will be welcomed in one of those states, welcomed with his husband and his children, welcomed in those states because those states are represented by senators who he stupidly thinks he can condescend to.
Affordability is the top concern for Americans across the country. Donald Trump has called affordability, I want to get this right, a hoax. He's called it a scam. He's called it a con job. You're the Secretary of Treasury. You know the numbers. Is affordability a hoax, a scam, or a con job?
Senator, it may be a bit nuanced for you, but what President Trump is referring to is the media saying that the affordability crisis was generated by this administration when it was you and President Biden who destroyed the buying power of the American people. So there is an affordability crisis, and you were front and center in it.
So let me make sure that I understand. Donald Trump is not saying that affordability, what's happening to families right now, is a hoax?
He is saying that trying to lay the blame at this administration rather than the Biden-Warren economy is a hoax.
Okay, so it all happened before he got it. And everything that's happened since then, nothing is a hoax here.
The Biden-Warren economy. What a sleazy punk. We have never seen testimony like this in Senate hearings, in House hearings. We have never had cabinet members think that their job is to go into the hearings and insult the Democratic senators. We've never had any Democratic cabinet member ever who thought the job was to go into a hearing and insult Republican members of committee. That never happened before. That is a Trump cabinet invention, and they invented it this time around. That's not what they were doing last time. We've never had a more ridiculous Secretary of the Treasury than that clown who you just saw. In Donald Trump's first administration, I thought Steve Mnuchin was the lowest it could go, but he now looks like a statesman compared to the buffoon Donald Trump has put in that job to lie for him every day. Scott Bessent lies about himself now, as he did yesterday in testimony to the House and today in testimony to the Senate when he was asked about writing tariffs are inflationary. Exactly 1 year before Donald Trump's second inauguration. Those are Scott Bessent's written words. Tariffs are inflationary. And in lying testimony yesterday and today, he denied that he said those words. He claimed that he had said they could be inflationary. No, that's a lie. And Scott Bessent lies with a deeply creepy ease. He exhibits no discomfort at all. He does it with the ease of a pathological liar. He does it with the ease of someone who was born lying. There was no evidence of Scott Bessent being a pathological liar before working for Donald Trump, but he is Donald Trump's best student in the art form of Trump speak, which is deranged, irrational, irrelevant lying. Think about what Scott Bessent, of all people, had to do to himself to become a Trumpian pathological liar in that Senate Banking Committee hearing today. The first Treasury Secretary to ever testify that way. 5 years after the Supreme Court, by one vote, made Scott Bessent's marriage legal in all 50 states, Donald Trump's presidential platform said what the Republican presidential platform has always said, quote, marriage between one man and one woman is the foundation for a free society. That's the party Scott Bessent has chosen to humiliate himself to serve. The Republican chairman of that committee, to whom Scott Bessent testified so respectfully today, voted against respect for Scott Bessent's marriage in 2022 when Democrats in the United States Senate passed the Respect for Marriage Act. Elizabeth Warren voted to respect Scott Bessent's marriage, as did every Democrat. He wants to sign the money. That's the Treasury Secretary's secret pleasure. For every Treasury Secretary, it always is. I learned that the first time I was running a Senate confirmation hearing for a Treasury Secretary at the Senate Finance Committee when I was staff director of the committee. The committee vote was unanimous. We tried to get to a floor vote as soon as possible, but there's always some traffic in your way on the Senate floor. It doesn't happen quickly, and the nominee kept impatiently calling me to ask exactly when he'd be confirmed, and I kept saying the same thing about the Senate floor and traffic and blah, 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 which I thought he would understand. And then, in a private conversation, one of his staff members told me what he was so eager about. He wants to sign the money. That's what the staff guy told me about the incoming Treasury Secretary. I'm surprised Donald Trump still lets the Treasury Secretary sign the money. Maybe Donald Trump doesn't know. Maybe he will seize that power too. If you look at whatever currency you have in your pocket right now, as I did a few minutes ago, you'll see their signatures. I've got a few 5s signed by Janet Yellen, a few 20s signed by Steve Mnuchin, and nothing signed by Scott Bessent, because it takes a while for that new currency to get into circulation. It takes a while for Scott Bessent to have that thrill of seeing it, carrying it around in his pocket. Imagine how thrilling it must be for Scott Bessent to sign the money. So thrilling he will debase himself in any way for Donald Trump. Look what he was willing to do to get there, to be the guy who signs the money. Think about how much he has had to contort his economic beliefs in order to lie for Donald Trump about tariffs. And we can only wonder what it does to his soul to go out of his way to try to insult Elizabeth Warren and other Democrats who fought for his right to legally live anywhere in this country as a married man. And what does it do to him? How does he feel when he genuflects respectfully to every Republican who fought to make his marriage illegal? It may be that no one has paid a higher personal price to work for Donald Trump than the man who gets to sign the money. Of all the lying quislings who work for Donald Trump, it may be Scott Bessent who is the most tortured of all of them. Today, the pathological liar who Scott Bessent works for said this.
You know, they rigged the second election. I had to win it. Had to win it. I needed it for my own ego. I would have had a bad ego for the rest of my life. Now I really have a big ego, though. Beating these lunatics was incredible, right? What a great feeling. Winning every swing state, winning the popular vote. The first time, you know, they said I didn't win the popular vote. I did. But they said. So they'd always say, they would always thought they'd introduce it. While Donald Trump did not win the popular vote, you know, I'm sitting up being introduced by a Democrat or somebody. And they say, why Donald Trump did not win the popular vote? He won the presidency. Here he is. I said, that was terrible.
He's a very sick man, Donald Trump. Steve Bannon says the Trump plan for this year's election is to surround polling places with ICE agents. That is against state and federal law, but this is Donald Trump we're talking about. So how can those laws actually be enforced? That is the question of the night. For the answer to that question, we will turn to former federal prosecutor Andrew Weissmann, who will join us next. Donald Trump's dangerously incompetent director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, said in writing to the Senate and the House that she led an FBI raid to seize voting records in Fulton County, Georgia, because, quote, my presence was requested by the president. That leaves it up to you to decide who is lying, Tulsi Gabbard or Donald Trump.
We have our director of national and international intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who's doing a great job. Where's Tulsi? She took a lot of heat 2 days ago because she went in at Pam's insistence. She went in and she looked at votes that want to be checked out from Georgia. They say, why is she doing it? Right, Pam? Why is she doing it? Because Pam wanted her to do it. And you know why? Because she's smart.
And yesterday, Steve Bannon announced the Trump plan to, quote, have ICE surround the polls come November, his exact words. The Brennan Center reports the law is crystal clear. It is illegal to deploy federal troops or armed federal law enforcement to any polling place. In fact, it is a federal crime for anyone in the U.S. military to interfere in elections in any way. More specifically, it is a crime punishable by up to 5 years in prison to deploy federal troops or armed men to any location where voting is taking place or elections are being held, unless such force be necessary to repel armed enemies of the United States. The law, which dates back to the end of the Civil War, originally also allowed troops at the polls when necessary to keep the peace, but that exception was removed more than 100 years ago. Joining us now is Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. Andrew, is the law crystal clear, and how can it be enforced in a Trump presidency?
So before I answer that, let me just add for the viewers in assessing the Tulsi Gabbard versus Donald Trump issue that you flagged, that Pam Bondi is not in charge of the Director of National Intelligence. They're both cabinet level positions, and Tulsi Gabbard does not report to Pam Bondi. In fact, she is Tulsi Gabbard is the head of the intelligence community, and that makes Pam Bondi a component who reports to Tulsi Gabbard. Anyway, to get to your question.
But Andrew, let's stay with it for 1 second. So just to be clear,
Yep.
Pam Bondi certainly couldn't order Tulsi Gabbard to go. Cabinet members are not eager to see other cabinet members interfere in their jurisdiction, and the FBI is Pam Bondi's jurisdiction. And so is it your bet, when you have to choose who's lying, that it is most likely that Donald Trump told Tulsi Gabbard to go?
Yeah, well, let's put it this way. Tulsi Gabbard has zero reason to have lied about why she was there and who told her to go there. And you can't imagine that a secretary is going to lie about their boss having said that. What would be the possible reason? Whereas I can think of a reason why Donald Trump would do it, because it was received badly by the press, so he is deflecting and saying it's someone else's fault. I think that is the president that we have.
So can Donald Trump surround polling places with ICE agents?
So can he? And that's one. And two is it legal? And so unfortunately, I have to separate it that way, because so much of what we have seen has been found by judges, including the Supreme Court of the United States, to have been actions taken by this president that are illegal. In fact, he did that in a way that the court said 9-0. It was illegal and violated due process. So the answer to can he is yes. The answer to is it lawful is no. I agree with the Brennan Center that there is clear federal law that makes it criminal. Having said that, although many people listening may say, well, the president could just pardon the people who are breaking the law, and that is true federally, there's still two remedies. One, it can violate various state laws, and that is not subject to a pardon. And the other is an injunction. A court can enjoin Donald Trump from doing this. So even if he tries to absolve them of criminal liability, district courts, courts of appeals, and the Supreme Court can enjoin any effort by the president to try and send in troops or other military forces to surround these voting places. And I do think that that is a real option. We are seeing it around the country where judges are enjoining the efforts that are going on in other contexts.
But we're also seeing those orders defied by ICE in particular, especially in Minneapolis, where it's dozens upon dozens of violations. So assuming there was an injunction saying ICE cannot surround polling places, again, the question comes up, who's going to stop them when Donald Trump orders them to go surround polling places, knowing that the Supreme Court has told Donald Trump whatever he says is not a crime, because it's impossible, according to this Supreme Court, for him to commit a crime when he's issuing these orders?
Look, that raises the sort of fundamental question of if the Supreme Court says you cannot do it and you're enjoined, is whether a politician will just be saying, you know what, we're going to defy that. That is possible. The courts do not have a standing army to enforce their laws. I do think there would be just, essentially all hell would break loose. But just in case people think I'm being Pollyannish, the thing that I am worried about, in addition to this reporting, is if the Department of Justice tries to actually just seize the ballot boxes after the voting and saying, well, I think there's alleged fraud. It's a bogus claim of fraud, which obviously we have seen repeatedly, including you played a clip tonight of the president doing that. And the Department of Justice going in and trying to get a search warrant or simply going in and seizing pursuant to like subpoena power and saying, we'll count the votes. Again, I think there are huge legal issues to that, but it's one where numerous people are focused on this issue to be prepared to go to court to get this stopped.
Andrew Weissmann, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
And coming up, the new Democratic governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger, has changed her state's policy in dealing with ICE. Governor Spanberger will join us next. Our next guest is fulfilling a campaign promise. Virginia's newly elected Democratic governor, Abigail Spanberger, won her election by 15 points 4 years after the Republican governor won by 2 points. She took the governorship away from the Republicans and has now cut the state of Virginia's ties with immigration and customs enforcement. The Washington Post reports one of her first acts after being sworn in January 17th was to issue an executive order rescinding an action by her predecessor, former Republican Governor Glenn Youngkin, that required state law enforcement agencies to enter into 287G agreements with federal immigration authorities. Those agreements deputize state officials to conduct federal immigration enforcement. On Wednesday, Spanberger directed the state police as well as corrections officials and other state agencies to cancel any such agreements. And today, Governor Spanberger joined 24 Democratic state governors in condemning Donald Trump's suggestion that he would nationalize November's midterm elections. The governors wrote in a joint statement, "Voting in free and fair elections is the foundation of our democracy. All Americans deserve to have their voices heard as they exercise their right to vote without interference from the federal government. President Trump's threats to remove the ability of states to run their own elections is an undemocratic attempt to silence the American people who are rejecting his costly and divisive agenda. While Trump whines about losing a free and fair election, he's now openly talking about rigging one in the future. Democratic governors won't let that happen." Joining us now is Virginia's Democratic Governor, Abigail Spanberger. Governor, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.
First of all, your decision about ICE. What brought you to that decision?
Well, importantly, on my first day in office, I said that I rescinded my predecessor's executive order and stated that no longer were these relationships mandated. And then I took a full review of the existence of 287G agreements across the Commonwealth of Virginia to have a full picture of what it is that we would be walking away from. And yesterday, I issued an executive order and an executive directive. In the executive order, I first began by frankly celebrating the professionalism of Virginia law enforcement, recognizing that in Virginia, we have law enforcement that carry as their North Star a commitment to professionalism and building up community trust, because it is essential to the ability to do good policing, to protect people, to investigate crimes, to uphold justice and the Constitution, both of the country and our Commonwealth. And what I found is that in looking at the 287G requirements, they explicitly say that law enforcement under those agreements can be under the supervision, quote, under the direction and supervision of ICE. And given the level of professionalism, vetting, training, and the standards that we hold dear here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, I want Virginia law enforcement, Virginia State Police, Virginia Department of Corrections, I want them operating under the leadership of their own agencies. And so I issued that executive directive ending 287G agreements. Now, to be very clear, if anyone, a federal agency, comes to Virginia law enforcement with a signed judicial warrant, Virginia law enforcement will continue to cooperate to uphold the law as they have been doing and as is expected. But no longer will they be under the direction or supervision of other agencies per a 287G agreement.
What are you going to do if Tulsi Gabbard shows up with a warrant issued by a federal judge in Missouri who's never been to Virginia to seize ballot boxes from the state of Virginia?
Well, then now that's something separate from the 287G issue. I mean, and I know I had to take a deep breath for a moment. As we think about a president who is saying that they want to essentially federalize elections, take control of elections. It runs in the face of even just the basic principles of our country. States run elections. That's how it works. And we have a president who has recognized that he is not going to win either of these midterms in 2026 or see any success for his party in 2028. And so he's getting desperate. And what is the real tragedy in this is that I would like to see not just Democratic governors saying that a president saying he's going to overtake elections and seize control. It shouldn't just be Democratic governors who are standing up and saying that that is wrong and that is unconstitutional. It should be every governor in every state across the country.
But I think we know that he's only going to do this in states that have Democratic governors.
Well, we are here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, certainly ensuring that we have are digging into every potential option and understanding of how it is that we execute our elections. In Virginia, notably, we have 45 days of early voting, which is certainly a benefit to the voter, space to time out, go and vote in person or vote by mail. And so while that gives many more opportunities to a voter, it also gives, many more days of early voting for us to contend with ensuring that we are protecting access to the ballot box. It's essential here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so we are looking at every legal angle to make sure that we are protecting what is the right of the Commonwealth of Virginia and other states to run our elections in accordance with federal and state law and ensure that every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot. That is what, as governor, I am going to ensure that we are doing here on the ground. But the fact that it is even up for discussion is yet one more outrage that comes from a president who continues to be absolutely lawless.
Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, I think your election scared Donald Trump with that 15-point margin more than anyone else's. Thank you very much for joining us tonight.
That's the highest compliment. Thank you very, very much, Lawrence.
Thank you, Governor. And coming up, the Border Patrol is always the problem. It always has been. That is the title of a new article, important piece by Professor Rees Jones, who will join us next.